into a shell hole, and I still didn't know I was hit. And I was firing over the front of the shell hole into Wana Ridge, and every time I would fire, I would just, my God, I would call for fire. They just were shooting at me from every place. And a fellow named Corvillian came running out. Bob Corvillian, he jumped down in the hole, and I told him that the hole was not a nice round hole. It was about a half hole. And to the left, where all the fire was coming from, it was open, so you had to push up against the front side of it. And Corvillian didn't know that, and he hunkered down in a squat, and they shot him right through the back. And I guess it kind of paralyzed him because he couldn't move, but he was sprawled out flat, and he was, you know, he was open to fire. So I spent the next 15, 20 minutes or whatever it took picking up rocks and clods of dirt and stuff, and built a little wall between him and the fire, so at least it would, you know, stop most of it. And he stayed there. He never moved. Just did the typical thing, pulled up his dungarees and put sulfa in the wound and left him. I mean, I stayed with him in the hole. I wasn't going anyplace. Mm-hmm. And but I did it right out of the movies. Every time I'd raise up to shoot, I'd bring fire, even before I fired. So I started putting my helmet on the end of my rifle and sticking it up over the hole, and they would just fire at my helmet, you know. But while I was in that hole with Corvillian, one of my best buddies, a fellow named Red Hughes, a big boy from Pennsylvania, clumsy as the damned ox, he came running out and jumped in the hole with me. And I said nice things to Red, like, get your butt down, and, you know, they're coming from this way. Well, Red stayed there for a few minutes and went back. Red made it through that campaign with never wounded. But he went back to tell them that Corvillian needed help and that I was wounded, but we couldn't move without Corvillian couldn't move. And about 11 o'clock or so, now this is one of the more interesting experiences I had, because I can't hardly believe it, but I'm in the hole, and all of a sudden I hear a machine gun firing at me from behind me. And I thought, see, I was really pinned down so tight I couldn't see anything anyplace, and nobody back could even see me. And I thought that the Nips had surrounded us, and here I was with Corvillian, who couldn't do anything, and myself, and I figured that the bastards were behind us. And so I guess instinctively I just did what I was supposed to do, because it sure as hell wasn't from bravery, but I just popped the clip that was in my rifle, put a fresh one in, put my bayonet on the rifle, and turned around with my back to the front of the hole and faced back. And I just figured that the first half a dozen of those bastards that came over were going to get shot or hit before they got me. But it was our own tank, and he was shooting over me at the Nips in front of me, and then he shot out some smoke bombs, or smoke shells, and the corpsman came out to get Corvillian, and I came out. That was a very trying experience, but at the time, I felt okay. You know, I really did. Just to digress, there were some other experiences on the island that I thought were interesting. Somewhere in this vicinity, I don't know where, but on back up where we had just come down south, I think, or later, but there were three of us out. Shouldn't have been, but we were out just docking around, you know. And we came to a cave, and I don't know where the guy had gotten it, but one of them had a Navy lantern, battle lantern. And we came to a cave. We decided to explore the cave. We went back into the cave, and, you know, we were being very, very quiet because we didn't know what was back there. And as we approached it was dark, and he was shining the light, and then there was a dog leg, and when we got to the dog leg and looked, there was a little red glow. And so we figured that it was charcoal. So we sneaked on back in very quietly. We didn't know there was anybody in there, but as we approached this thing, we could see there was a little pot on it. Well, then kicked the light up, and right there in front of us was an earthen mound, a flat area about 3 feet high or something. and there were 3 NIP soldiers on that thing asleep. You know, they were probably tired from their night activities, but there was 3 NIP soldiers with their feet pointing right at us on that earthen bed asleep, and they didn't know we were there. We pulled a grenade out and laid it right in the middle of them, and then hunkered down below the dirt when the grenade went off. And then when we stood back up, the NIP that was in the middle, and we had the light on him, the NIP that was in the middle raised right up like that. His face was no more than 3 feet from mine, and he was just a mass of blood and stuff. It just scared the hell out of me. I mean, I absolutely, totally panicked, and I ran out of that cave at 500 miles an hour, and the other 2 guys right with me. Now, we stood out in front, and I guess I must have shaken for 5 minutes. I was just so shook. But we got our nerve back, and we went back in. We knew they had to be dead, but we went back in. We got to the dog leg, and we shined the light on them and hit them with our M1s. And from that cave, I brought home, and still have, a Japanese flag that was in the box. It was a regimental flag of some kind. Had the mast, the stand, the box, and the flag, and it's a multi-layered silk flag with golden tassels around it. Most gorgeous thing you've ever seen. But, and to carry that story on, I gave that flag to a friend, Sergeant White, who was in the 37s. So he had the little Jeep puller that pulled the 37s, and I'm lugging this flag around. You know, nobody let go of their souvenirs, but Sergeant White said he would take the flag for me, and he said, when this thing is over, look me up. Would you know that when it was over, and we had gone back to the north end of the island and set up on Buckner Bay area, I went over looking for the 37s. I found them, and I said, I'd like to see, where's Sergeant White? And the fellow said he was hit. His Jeep was blown out from under him, and he went home. I said, damn, he had a flag of mine. He says, are you the guy? Sergeant White had presence of mind to give the guy my flag, and he had it. And I took it from him and carried it home with me. That was, that sequence of events is unreal. But
of all the experiences Robert Hefley had during the war, that night in the cave haunted him for years to come, right up to his death. And the years following the war, he would have nightmares that he was back in that cave again, looking into the face of that soldier who rose from the dead to look him right in the eye.
Getting back to the south end of the island, I was out of action for from about May 17th until June the 6th, and I rejoined the company.
Were you at sea at that time?
No, I was, big deal. They took me to Sea Medical Battalion. I never got off the island. And I just returned to action then, you know, like, 20 or 20 days later, I think, July the 6th or 7th. But no, I never left the island, which was kind of unique. I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, I rejoined the company, and it was still, it had rained all the time I was in the hospital. And I mean, it had just rained, and everything was bogged down and nothing moving. And when I came out, it was as bad as it was, you know, when I talked about earlier. So they hadn't done a lot of movement. But when I came out, we made the assault on Kanishi, and Kanishi was the 7th Marines moved so quickly when we did the assault that we got up on the ridge with the nips still in the ridge, and we were cut off. We were totally isolated for 3 or 4 days, and that's when we had the airdrops from ammo and water and food, which wasn't all as simple as that either, because the damn drops were made never really accurately, and we had to go through areas where the nips had it totally zeroed in. And we kidded, you know, in World War II, when you had your 2nd wound, they sent you home. Maybe they figured your luck was running out. Well, I had plenty of chance for the 2nd wound, and I'd be damned if I was going to do it. But anyway, Kanishi was basically the last big battle on Okinawa. And interestingly enough, after we had secured and island was secured, they came through and they said, we need 2 volunteers to drive trucks. And a friend of mine and I volunteered. We had never been in a truck in our life. We volunteered to be truck drivers, and we did for the next 4 or 5 weeks, because the island was over. We were part of that group that we had a 10-wheeler. Well, what they did was they took us to an area, and there were 10-wheelers and a dozen mechanics or something, and tents piled up on the back of the 10-wheelers. They drove us over to a beach area, which was very close to the sea beach, thank goodness, and we had to raise our tents, and that's where we lived. And those trucks went 24 hours a day. Truck outfit, which turned out to be the purpose was to stock the island for the occupation. And we set up, they gave us tents and trucks and mechanics and set us up over on the beach by the sea beach. And we hauled more gear in the 5 or 6 weeks that we were hauling than anybody had ever hauled. And that we drove the hell out of those trucks, 24 hours a day. On my little 2.5 tonner, at one time I had 20 of those 1-ton packages of airport iron, runway stuff. But we hauled food, clothing to everybody. I mean, you were hauling to the Army, to the Navy, to the Seabees. And we hadn't been in, our little camp was barren as heck. But about the 3rd day we were there, somebody came roaring in with a reefer. And another day later, somebody came in with a generator, so we had our own refrigerator. And then from that point on, every time anybody carried food, they would always stop by camp and throw off a few good cases of stuff. So we weren't hurting. But when that little escapade was over, we went back north to join our outfit, which was set up on Buckner Bay. And incidentally, we were there when the typhoon of 45 hit. And that was, 150, 175 mile an hour wind and rain, absolutely leveled everything. There was not a tent, there was nothing, no building standing. That was a terrible thing. And but there was even a destroyer escort that was beached. The tide and the wind and the waves had brought him in, and he was lying on his side on the beach, right down at the beach. Brought him in that far.
And what month was this?
That would have been probably August of 45. Yeah, about August or late August, early September, somewhere in through there.
What were the duties of the occupation force?
We didn't have any. All we did was we just parked there, and we had been told that we would probably be hitting mainland Japan around the end of the year, so we didn't have a hell of a lot of time between where we were and where we thought we were going to be like 3 or 4 months later. But I remember when dear old Harry S. Truman dropped that H-bomb, we were only 325 miles from the south end most southern end of Japan. We didn't see or hear the bomb, but we were pretty damn close as any military people were, I think. But when he told him to drop it and then dropped the second one, man, we all kissed him, That was neat.
After my dad left the war, he and the others got this notice from President Harry Truman. Robert C. Hefley, to you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartful thanks of a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform. Because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task, we now look to you for leadership and example and further exalting our country in peace. Harry S. Truman.
But then in September, we shoved off for China, 1st Marine Division. A lot of people don't know it, but the 1st Marine Division literally liberated China because the Japanese had given up to us, but they had not let go control of China. And we went to China. My outfit, it was 1st Marine Division that did it. My outfit went to, we I went from Okinawa to China on an LCI, which is a terribly small boat for that trip, but we landed at a little town called Taku, and then we went by train up to Tenzin, and in Tenzin they had these little teeny trucks that would hold maybe 10 people in the bed in the back, and a little coke burner sitting here. That was the gas. They were coke. They ran on coke. That was the most magnificent time I'll ever experience. We went through the town of Tenzin, and as I say, 8 or 10 Marines in each truck. And there were, they told us later, 1.5 million people there to welcome us. And they were hanging from the balconies. They were jumping on the trucks, and all we saw was ding hao, you know, thumbs up and ding hao. And that was quite a reward, really. But and then we proceeded to disarm the Japanese soldiers. And my role there, my company's role, we set up at Tangshan, which is halfway between Tenzin and Qinhuantao. Qinhuantao is a very northern port. In fact, the ocean freezes over out there a quarter mile or so. And you know, these were guys coming from the South Pacific. Suddenly we're in weather that's freezing the ocean. We all had our problems with that, but they finally got us some parkas and stuff. But we set up in Tangshan. In Tangshan, its only claim, it was a coal mining town. Its only claim to fame is it's the town that 7 or 8 years ago disappeared from the face of the earth on that earthquake in China. And I guess 1 million people were killed. But we stationed there, and we would go north, take the Japanese soldiers and their families on the train, and bring them back to Tenzin. Then they'd put them on a ship and send them home. And problem with that was the Chinese communists were now very active in northern China. They were blowing up the railroads. They were shooting at the trains. They were trying to blow up the little bridges, so we had a squad of Marines 24 hours a day guarding every railroad bridge. And we even had to rearm a company of Japanese to let them come help us on a train that got track blown up and the train got stranded. You know, we only had 4 or 5 Marines on every train. And so the Japanese soldiers came marching up the railroad tracks with their weapons and relieved the train, or at least held off. But we ended up, before we left China, we were in a shooting war with the Chinese communists. They shoot at the train, we shoot back. We were shooting at anything that even remotely resembled an aggressor, we would shoot back.
Was the aggression, the animosity of the Chinese communists directed toward the Japanese, or?
I think so. It was harassment of the Japanese. Sure, they weren't weren't harassing us, but it was directed at the Japanese, we're sure. But the primary foe was the Chinese nationalists. See, right. The Chinese nationalists, we were arming those people, Chiang Kai-shek and his people, and we would see them go marching off down the road with Tommy guns and M1s and things, machine guns. At nighttime from Tangshan, we would hear mortar and machine gun battles going on all night. I mean, they were really going at it, and my God, that was in late 45, early 46.
My dad had some lighter times in China. Here's a picture of a pretty girl sitting on his knee. And that girl was definitely not my mother. While in China, my dad wrote a letter to his mom that he had a chink girlfriend. It's not known if this picture he had in his GI trunk is that girl, but she sure looks pretty. In that letter, he told his mom the girls are short, just like her, and their eyes aren't that slanted. It wouldn't be polite to call a Chinese girl a chink today or refer to her slanted eyes, but altering his words to be politically correct would be to alter history. While he was in China, my dad received a letter from the Red Cross instructing him of his father's grave condition and a request to come home. My dad could not return then, but his father survived long enough to see his son after the war.
You know, I was in China 6 months, and it was worse when I left than it was when I got there. So that was a foreboding of a war, because when I came home, I got married in 1947, and when we bought our first house in 1950, I was still so sure, 49, I was still so sure another war was coming. I kept a survival kit in my garage all the time for several years. I just knew there was going to be another war, and I figured that, you know, who knows? I was just being prepared, that's all. Thank God I didn't have to use it, but that was, and one of the smartest things I did when I left the Marine Corps, I didn't sign up for the reserves, and I didn't get called back for Korea.
As so many did.
Yeah, oh, so many of my friends did. The sadness is, see, I'm 60 years old, so most of my friends were around my age. Some of them a little older. I've tried to check up on those people, and they're basically all dead. And some of them have been dead for 15 years. So it was, whatever it was, their longevity sure was shorter than it should have been. Don't know why. And that's the saddest part of it, is that I never really was able to get back in touch with. Well, I did find my old platoon sergeant. By that time he was a lieutenant colonel, Tiny Thattenhurst. And in fact, I got a chance to see him and spend time with him, and then he died about a year ago, so no, he's gone too.
I think we've got what we need. This concludes the interview with Robert C. Hefley, veteran of the Battle for Okinawa and occupation service in China. It's February 10th, 1986, and the interview was conducted in Los Angeles, California.
The battery just started flashing.
Howard, or Robert Howard, was a Blackfoot Indian from Butte, Montana, I think, or Helena, one or the other. He and Pappy Sizemore, who was Dale Sizemore from Heber City, Utah, we were just like that. And Pappy was older. Pappy was like 25 years old, so he signed his name Old Man on my picture. But we had a very nice photo taken in China, a very good photo.
Uh-huh.
And I have that.
In a portrait studio?
Yeah, in a studio. And I was going to bring that to show you just what some World War II Marines looked like when they had their greens on.
Did you have the black leather belt?
Well, I think these are probably they're mostly chest and above. But yeah, we had the black belt. But in fact, that when we were in boot camp and in Pendleton, when we would come to Los Angeles, that belt, your old Sam Brown, was, I don't know if you've ever heard of what they call the Chuco Wars in Los Angeles?
It rings a familiar.
Okay, well, apparently we had the Mexican young men and the Marines. I don't know what the animosities were, because some of our best Marines were of, you know, Spanish or Mexican heritage. But anyway, there was some sort of a problem, and they were kind of like Zoot Suiters, or they call them Chucos. But so the guys would bring those belts. They used to give us training, for Christ's sakes, at Pendleton, to wrap the belt around your hand.
Use the buckle.
And let the buckle hang out there 4 or 5 inches, and God, that's a lethal weapon. But so.
Yeah, I've heard about fighting with those.
Those are damn tough weapons. But China was very, very neat duty. I had an opportunity, just to show you how sneaky little things happen. When we were sitting in Tangshan, company clerk had gone home, and the lieutenant, who was the company commander, he said, "Who in the hell can type?" Well, I could type. I said, "I can type." His name was Jim Landrigan, Lieutenant Landrigan, big guy, you know, 6'4", and a voice that you could hear from here to your building. So he said, "Okay, goddamn it, Hefley, you're the company clerk." So I'm in the office. In comes this communication from headquarters, and it told the company commander to select 2 men who would go to Tientsin as guests of the Chinese nationalist government for 10 days, and that a DC-3 or a C-47 would pick them up right outside of where we were stationed. So I had a friend about the size of the sergeant. His name was Rocky Woods, and he was an absolute character. Anyway, I said, "Rocky, how'd you like to go to Peking?" He said, "Sure." I sent our names back in and never did tell Jim Landrigan. And about a week later comes this orders to Landrigan, PFC, Robert C. Hefley, and PFC, Rocky Wood, will report to this. Landrigan said, Hefley, what the hell is this? I said, well, shit, I'm going to Peking. And he said, I said, well, you weren't here and somebody had to go. So anyway, I spent 10 days in Peking as the guest. Man, they took us to we were the first Westerners to go through the Forbidden Palace, which is that's where the dynasties hung out. And then they took us to the Summer Palace, the Winter Palace, where Sun Yat-sen, we had an absolute blast as the guest of the government there for 10 days. But that's only because I was in the right place at the right time. But that was really, yeah, that was neat. Well, guys, I appreciate very much. I hope this turns out well.
I'm sure it will. We'll go back to the office right away and take a look at it here.
When Robert Hefley was honorably discharged on June 5, 1946, he brought his souvenirs and belongings home in this old trunk. Veterans apparently received a lot of papers when they were discharged from the service. My dad received a small mustering out payment from the service. Apparently it wasn't enough because he needed to borrow another $30 from the Red Cross, which he paid back. The service also gave their men booklets after the war, like this one, on going back into civilian life. He also had to declare the souvenir items he had brought back from the war. You can see his list of weapons and the flag that he declared in these papers. He also brought home some Japanese currency. My dad thought that a dead Japanese soldier that he had either shot or come upon was the payroll master for his unit, because he had a lot of money on him. Every serviceman also received separation papers, which I suppose came in handy if he needed to show that he had been in the service. He had some trouble with foot rot, which was common among men returning from the service, and this fungus stayed on his toes and feet the rest of his life. He apparently complained about this and some numbness in his foot that had been shot, but the American Red Cross sent him a letter telling him his request for either treatment or compensation was denied. When my dad got back home, he lived for a while with relatives in the Los Angeles area. There he got acquainted again with that skinny little girl who was the sister of his Uncle Jess's wife. She had grown into a pretty young high school girl, and now her being 4 years younger didn't seem like such a big deal. Well, he took that girl, Beverly, to her high school prom. One day in August of 1947, the summer after Beverly graduated from high school, Bob and Beverly snuck off to Yuma, Arizona and got married at 4:30 in the morning. She was underage, still only 17, so she put down the age on her next birthday on the marriage license. Well, I guess after 56 years of marriage and 2 kids, Uncle Sam isn't too concerned about that fudge. After my dad returned from the war and got married, he attended Woodbury College on the GI Bill and graduated cum laude. He worked as a parking valet while going to college in downtown Los Angeles. It looks like work was a little slow this day. Some days were better, though. He got to park cars at the Academy Awards and see all the stars. My mom and dad started out married life like any other couple, working hard, and weekends were for leisure. They had some swell cars back then and eventually bought a 1958 Chevy Nomad station wagon, aqua and white colored, with an Uga horn. In 1951, the Hefleys bought their first house, a small 2-bedroom home in Pasadena on Wagner Street. 3 years later, along came their first child, Andrew J. Hefley, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Colleen Carroll Hefley. By now, my dad was certified by the Board of Accountancy and was a young professional in the field of accounting. As the years went by, he branched out into property development and worked his remaining professional